Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. Today we're very fortunate to be joined by somebody who's got quite a bit of experience in the political realm, not only as an organizer in days past, he's more of a community organizer now, but also as well, he is a political blogger. So he keeps his fingers fairly close on the pulse for what's going on in Alberta politics. So we're very fortunate that Scott Harold Payne has agreed to sit down with us and chat about what's going on for a little bit today. So Scott, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm glad to sit down and chat. It never takes much arm twisting to get me to sit down and talk about politics, particularly Alberta politics. So happy to be here.
To start with, just for our audience members who may not be familiar with you and your work, if you could kind of give us an introduction for sort of who you are, what you've historically done, and what you're doing now.
So I've lived in Calgary since 2007. I was a transplant from Vancouver. I've been involved with the NDP on, in a variety of different contexts. I was involved in British Columbia while I was there. I've sort of worked with the party federally, and certainly in the last little while, sort of starting in about 2012, got very active as a New Democrat in Calgary, organizing for the party, and was got very deeply involved in the lead up to the 2015 election, starting in 2014, and then went to go work for the Notley government in the NDP government caucus as the Southern Alberta director from 2016 through to 2019. So my sort of the history and the work that people are most familiar with when it comes to me in Alberta politics is as an NDP organizer. I have lately, over the last year and a bit, decided to sort of focus, as you mentioned, more of my time and attention on community-based, sort of like general political organizing. So I'm not, I don't have a formal role with the party. I'm, not an elected person. I'm not, or an elected officer of the party as I've been in the past, and things like that. I'm just out there. There are a whack of people who are getting involved in politics in Alberta for the first time, and there are lots of really interesting conversations and discussions, and a lot of great energy out there. And I'm really focused on just going and talking to and engaging and interacting and working with those folks. And part of that now is doing political blogging, both on my own site and then in a couple of other places, just to push the or contribute to maybe the political dialogue in the province in some useful ways.
Now, when you say published in some other places, can you give a couple of examples of sort of what those are?
Yeah, I had a piece that was published in Maclean's, or on Maclean's, because it wasn't in the written magazine, but on their website over the summer. And I've now done relatively recently two pieces for Progress Alberta on their Progress Report site. So that's sort of in addition to the published work that I do on my own site, scottharoldpayne.com.
Okay. Way to get the plug in. So to start with, one of the big reasons why I wanted to have you on is you did a bit of a series on how members of Jason Kenney's staff have chosen to interact with the public. And I'm saying it as nicely as I can for now, because we'll get into the not.
That is very diplomatic.
Nice later. So I'm pretty sure you know what series I'm talking about. Can you just go into sort of the broad strokes of what the series was and what inspired you to do it?
So the series is called, I called it the Bully Pulpit series. Yeah, it looked at the ways in which members of the UCPE government staff have utilized their positions and their sort of government identified roles and social media accounts to abuse and bully and harass and ultimately try and silence outspoken Albertans and predominantly, almost exclusively, as a matter of fact, women. And I didn't like, so, I mean, people, people on Twitter and people who are active on AbLedge will, or ABLedge, there's always a debate about how you actually pronounce that hashtag. But at any rate, on that hashtag, will be familiar with the instances of this sort of harassment. People, know Gillian Ratty, and they, and they know Wing Carly and Stacey Spida and maybe to a slightly lesser degree, but many people will be familiar with Melanie Thomas. But I didn't like, and so like there had been some media pickup on these things, particularly around Dr. Ratty, because there was mainstream media pickup in terms of what happened in her case, and some blowback that sort of wound up cropping up for Matt Wolf, who is involved in pretty much all of these stories, not surprisingly. But I didn't see anybody really digging into what actually happened and getting into the details around, what behavior were various staff members of this government engaging in, and why why is it so like offensive, frankly? Why is this something that people should be aware of and people should be concerned about? And I had varying degrees of relationships with the four women that I talked to. I mean, the inspiration for it was just like, these are important stories and they should be told, and they should be told in sort of like in the detail and in the comprehensive fashion that they deserve to be told. And if nobody else is going to tell them, then maybe that's something that I should take a crack at doing. And then having relationships with those four women, I was able to sort of approach them and say, hey, I'm interested in writing this series of stories. Would you be willing to talk to me here? Like, here are some parameters around how we can do this. And, I need to make sure that you're 100% comfortable with, with the process and with the end product. And, I tried to approach it really as a collaboration with them, where ultimately, like, these weren't my stories. These were their stories. And I was I was sort of acting as a storyteller, but I didn't fundamentally have ownership over the story. They did, and so they needed to, I needed for them to feel like I did a good job of telling their stories, and I think that we were able to achieve that. It was a tough series to write, because there were some really horrendous things that happened, and we really got into talking about who are these women as people. And what were some of the personal ramifications? What were some of the professional ramifications? What were some of the outcomes that you didn't necessarily hear about? And they were really heartbreaking and really gut wrenching, both to talk to them about and to write about. But again, I think really important for people to hear about. So, the response to the series was quite good.
What kind of for I mean, Mr. Kenney loves to talk about how Twitter doesn't matter, and so I think that there's a perception for some people that a lot of the drama activities, whatever we want to call it, that happens on Twitter isn't something that a lot of Albertans see. So for the people who don't follow, and I say ABLedge, for the people who don't follow AB Ledge, let's what kind of behaviors are we talking about that occurred before you wrote the story? Because I think that there were also some fairly pertinent things that happened after your series came out as well. But let's start with the before. So, can you give me some examples?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so in Dr. Ratty's case, Matt Wolf, when he went after her for recording a video that, she freely admits was very profanity laced, and she was just sort of speaking her mind, and in the course of doing that, did a bunch of swearing, because that's just where she was at. So Matt Wolf went to sort of address this and do sort of a dressing down or a litigation of who Dr. Ratty was, and lodged all sorts of critiques against her. But sort of the thing that I think people really latched onto was that he drew attention to in the course of that critique, a picture of Dr. Ratty with her children, with her family, with Jagmeet Singh, I mean, Jillian acknowledges that this was a picture that was out there, she had posted it on Twitter, but to have the Premier's executive director of issues management, in the course of publicly criticizing and undermining her legitimacy, point to that picture and not bother to consider the ramifications of drawing attention to a picture that contained her family, her kids, was really distressing and really disturbing. In the case of Wing Carly, who just went out and found some publicly available information about Health Minister Tyler Shandro's involvement in his wife's private health brokerage, and brought that to people's attention. Again, Matt Wolf, and then later the minister himself, sort of launched these series of incredibly vicious attacks, maligning her character and imputing all sorts of motives in terms of what she had done, and effectively unleashed sort of a horde of their Twitter followers on her, where the outcome was that not only did she feel like suddenly she was in the crosshairs of government staff and a minister, but she was receiving all sorts of threats and insults and abuse from a variety of other Twitter users. Melanie Thomas was mentioned by name in the legislature by the Premier of the province, undermining, suggesting that there was some sort of question in terms of her academic integrity. And then Stacey, has been, again, harassed by various government staff, again, received numerous very distressing threats online as a result of being outspoken. And all of these women at one point just had to log off Twitter, log off all sort of online presence, because the backlash that they were receiving as a result of sort of this abuse and this public dressing down that they were getting from government staff and from elected representatives was just resulting in the worst sort of the worst sorts of online behavior that very often public leaders go on record as saying, we won't stand for this, and this is inappropriate behavior and we don't condone this, and yet it was hard to see how the folks that were engaging in this harassment didn't understand that what they were doing was clearly going to result in exactly the sort of behavior that they claimed not to condone. And it's been pointed out by More than a couple of people, folks who are much smarter and much more, better read in terms of this sort of stuff. That like this kind of like this going after private citizens. I mean, it's like one thing to go after your political opposition and to go, critique, other members of the opposition, other MLAs, and other political figures. But to go after private citizens in this sort of concerted and consistent and malicious way is just it's kind of unheard of. Like this just isn't what happens in democracies. This isn't how politicians are supposed to behave, and it had ultimately has. And I think is designed to have a very chilling effect in terms of debate and public discourse in the province.
So to deconstruct that just a little bit, one of the arguments that somebody might float in defense, and I personally have a difficult time wrapping my head around how a taxpayer-paid government official going after a private citizen is defensible, but for fun and games, let's say that it is. One of the defenses could potentially be that we'll go with the example of Matt Wolf showing somebody else's kids. Well, I didn't think that anyone was going to go after her kids, or I didn't. She's the one who posted it, so I thought it was okay. I personally have a bit of a problem with that because there have been no shortage of UCP staffers who have actually made quite a public display of the fact that because of the abuse that they've received on the Twitter machine, they've made their profiles private and they've locked down all of their social media. So it seems to me that there has to be an awareness of the fact, even if we assume that Matt Wolf is just oblivious to the fact that when he dog whistles, dogs show up. It seems to me there has to be some awareness of the fact that the things that are said on Twitter do have and social media in general do have very real ramifications, and there are people who will take what's said and run with it to some degree. How do you what's your take on sort of because Matt Wolf did at one point, I'm pretty sure, plead sort of ignorance to the potential damage that he was bringing. What's your take on that disconnect?
I mean, I just don't buy it, frankly, right? Sure, Matt Wolf and other staff members might sort of plead in ignorance and say, "Oh, we didn't think anything was going to come of this," or "We didn't tell anybody to go and do things," or we're just responding to critiques that these women are lodging against our ministers and our government. I mean, I don't buy that they don't actually understand that there will be these ramifications from their behavior. But even if they don't, they ought to. Like that's part of their job as government staff people is like when you are in a senior staff role for serving the premier of the province, there is a standard that you need to hold yourself to as somebody fulfilling that role, and understanding that you have as part of that role. And again, like it's not, I mean, they like to blur the lines here, but let's be clear, in every single case where a government staffer, went after a private citizen on social media, the social media accounts that they were using invariably contained their titles and the ministries that they were involved with. There was an official status that was marked by the accounts that they were using, that gave their behavior a legitimacy and sort of a platform that that if you're not sort of thinking about what the implications of your behavior might be when you're utilizing that platform, that's in my sense, or in my my opinion, as somebody who's worked for government before, is an absolute dereliction of your duty, right? You are not filling out, you're not stepping up and fulfilling sort of the moral obligations and the professional obligations, that you ought to be aware of and ought to be trying to fulfill as somebody who is ultimately a staff person for the elected government of the province. And you don't it's not good enough to just sort of write it off to obliviousness and sort of say like, oh well, I didn't think that through. Well, then the response is, well, you should have thought that through. That's the sort of thing that you need to be taking into consideration if you're going to be a professional individual who is acting with integrity, and somebody that the voters of this province can feel confident is doing a good and responsible job.
That's one of the things that's particularly fascinating for me, because with Matt Wolf in particular, one of the biggest reasons why I bump sort of on his, oh, I didn't know that was what was going to happen, is we're talking about the guy who literally ran the campaign to character assassinate Brian Jean. And I mean, CBC has released the emails that demonstrate that that's. I don't need to put the word allegedly in front of that because it happened. So it's very difficult for me to see him go, I didn't know that would happen, when he is an assassin by trade. So that's the.
And it's not like he started it's not like he just started yesterday being involved in political organizing, right? I mean, this is somebody who has a long career in politics, who has worked at the federal level, has worked at the provincial level. This is somebody who has seen these sorts of scenarios and situations play out in a variety of different contexts. So like that would be like me trying to plead the fifth on on engaging in obvious slander on social media, against somebody that I was lodging a critique against, right? It's like, look, Scott, you've been involved in politics for long enough to know where the lines are, and to know what the ramifications, what the consequences are going to be if you cross those lines. And if you, I mean, it's a bit of a catch 22 for Matt and other folks out there who are working for this government. It's either you understand where those lines are and you are making a conscious decision to cross those lines, or you're just really bad at your job. Are you really that incompetent that you don't having been involved in political organizing and being involved in multiple levels of government for as long as you have, that you really don't get where those lines are? So I don't think that Matt Wolf would go around suggesting that he's incompetent and that he doesn't know what he is doing. So he needs to pick a lane. Either you're completely incompetent or you knew what you were doing. You make the decision about which one you're going to cop to, but you got to cop to one of them.
The other piece of that, there's to me, one of the other concerns that I have with the situation with Mr. Wolf is, if we go with he's incompetent. I don't personally believe that's the case, but if that's what we're going to go with, he has a long and demonstrated history of being this kind of incompetent. And at the same time, if we go with he's not incompetent, then that means that he's doing the job that he was hired to do well. In either case, I think it's important to highlight that we're talking about the executive issues manager for the Premier of Alberta. So if he's incompetent, it would seem to me at least that the Premier has a responsibility to address this incompetent person who's harassing private citizens. And if that's not the case, which, like I said, I don't think Matt Wolf's incompetent. I think he's doing the job he was hired to do. But if that's not the case, that has some really alarming implications for how the Premier of Alberta, a man who said that he was going to raise the bar for decorum, is approaching politics and how he's approaching leadership in Alberta. What's your sense of that?
Well, I mean, I think so. For one, the incompetence argument only gets you so far. So if Matt wants to plead incompetence or plead obliviousness to what he was doing, okay. When you got called out on that in December 2019, when you engaged in these attacks against Gillian Ratty, then you cease to be oblivious about about the outcomes and the appropriateness of your behavior, and then you chose to go and continue engaging in that behavior. So at that point, you're no longer oblivious. You know exactly what you're doing. You got into trouble about it. There were news stories that ran on CTV and other media outlets, and you got called out on it. At that point, there's a willful incompetence that starts to kick in. I mean, ultimately, I agree. I think that Matt Wolf is doing exactly what he was hired to do, and it's like, I mean, it's here's what is happening, at least from my perspective, is Matt, Jason Kenney knows exactly what Matt Wolf is up to day in, day out, and knows exactly what the sort of behavior that he's engaging in. And the fact that he hasn't stopped it or curtailed it or made, frankly, I mean, one of the things that I noted was, I think it was in a piece that I wrote about Gillian Ratty, is that like the most notable sort of response from this government has been a deafening silence about all of this. Like they just haven't said anything whatsoever, have chosen not to acknowledge that it's happening, whatsoever. Ultimately, what Matt Wolf is doing for Jason Kenney is being the attack dog that Jason Kenney knows that he can't be. It creates this distance between ultimately exactly the sort of politics that Jason Kenney has always intended to bring to the province. And the sort of politics that he is, trained in and brought up in, and has developed an expertise in, but also understands that if he were to engage in that sort of behavior, if he were to fully own that sort of political strategy, that would not be acceptable to a broad cross section of Albertans. So what he has to do is he has to hire a Matt Wolf who goes in and trolls people on Twitter and attacks people and is antagonistic and argumentative and inappropriate and silences people and creates a political chill in terms of having fulsome debate and dialogue in the province, and does all the things that people have criticized Matt Wolf for doing. And I would say, make no mistake, he is doing that not just on behalf of, but at the behest of Jason Kenney. So that's when Jason Kenney starts, says he wants to raise the decorum of politics in the province. I mean, actions speak louder than words. That's great for you to throw out there, but everything. And look, I've been involved in political organizing for over 20 years at this point. I struggle to think of an example of a government that has been as vindictive and malicious and petty and just mean-spirited and inappropriate as this government. Like they regularly caused my jaw to hit the floor, where it's like, I didn't think you could shock me again, but here we are. Sorry, you had a question though.
Well, I was just going to say, like, we know that there was a kamikaze campaign that was run against Brian Jean. And one of the things that has repeatedly struck me with the behavior of the Matt Wolfs and the Brian Batesons and that little cabal of assassins
White dudes,
is
yeah.
that in a lot of ways they're running kamikaze campaigns against anyone who has any kind of criticism against the government. But as you highlighted earlier, and I think this is really important to note, they disproportionately target women. How do you think Albertans should react to the fact that we have a government that is clearly sanctioning personal attacks on dissent?
I mean, I think Albertans should find that unacceptable and should be offended. And I think, like, I know that there is a lot of, there's a lot of cynicism out there when it comes to Alberta voters and, what people will put up with and what they won't put up with and what they do take exception to and what they don't. And it's not like, I don't, I mean, like, you can look at polling and see that there is still a not insubstantial chunk of Albertans who do support this government, and that many of the folks whose support they have has bled off to, like, arguably even worse versions, of sort of conservative options, but I do think that there is an increasing number of Albertans who are really disconcerted about what they're seeing from this government. And I do think that, like, part of the reason why you have folks like Matt Wolf and the other, the White Dudes Club that like to go out and attack women and attack dissent on social media is that this behavior, this sort of this tone of politics that this government hasn't just endorsed, but has sort of taken to new levels, it bleeds off social media, right? Like, it's not contained just to Twitter. I mean, like, you can see that just in terms of what the outcomes were when they went after Dr. Ratty. Jillian will quite rightly complain that CTV didn't actually bother to contact her to get her side of the story when they ran the story, which she was frustrated about, and I think is perfectly reasonable for her to be frustrated about. But it showed up in mainstream media. I think that, like, like, this stuff isn't just contained to some little Twitter vacuum. It bleeds out of these platforms and out of these environments. These are porous environments where people talk about it on Twitter, but then wind up having, I have conversations with my coworkers about this sort of stuff. Like, it starts to get talked about around kitchen tables and around water coolers and in broader context. And I do think that there's an increasing number of Albertans who are worried and who don't find it acceptable. And I think that that trend is part and parcel of why they continue to do this. Is like they're ultimately trying to scare people away from talking about it. And trying to, and also, like, scare people away from talking about it, silence dissent, but also ultimately, bottoming out decor in terms of politics in Alberta only serves to benefit Jason Kenney and the UCP. Because they have no compunctions about acting in this way, as they've made, more than evident. Like, engaging in corrosive and malicious, political discourse and debate and strategy. Like that's where they live. That's their home. Whereas they know that their opponents, regardless of who you're talking about, whether you're talking about the NDP, whether you're talking about Liberals, whether you're talking about the Alberta Party, whether you're talking about red Tories and sort of folks that identify with that sort of what now seems like ancient history progressive conservative dynasty. There are differences, in all those folks, but I think none of those factions of political activists and folks who are engaged in politics within those camps are particularly comfortable. Like there's a line that they won't cross, where they're not going to engage in that sort of behavior. They're not going to stoop that low, and by sort of like taking the knees out from so the integrity of Alberta politics and making it okay to be down there. It basically it vindicates and justifies all of their behavior. By having, and I've had people sort of in response to these stories that I've written say like, well, what's wrong with this? Like, this is just, like they're just responding to their opponents. They're just responding to critiques that are coming their way. There's nothing out of the ordinary with this, because people have become so desensitized to the idea, because it's happened so frequently and so regularly, and without any acknowledgement of inappropriateness or crossing lines or acting in an unscrupulous fashion. So as a result, Jason Kenney and the UCP get to hang out down there doing that thing that they're perfectly happy to do and know will work, and know that their opponents won't go there, and they get a get out of jail free card as a result. So I mean, I think the entire strategy is they're 100% conscious of what they're doing and very intentional about it, and they are doing it because for as much as they are taking on political damage for doing it, they also know it's going to work. Like, it's going to be a successful strategy. And the challenge for those of us who take exception to the idea that this would be sort of the norm with our politics is we have to find a way of combating that. We have to find a way of reestablishing sort of those standards and those lines, and say, no, you don't get to hang out down here. You don't get to engage in politics in that way. That's not acceptable. And ultimately, the ultimate repudiation needs to be that if you're not comfortable with and don't find this sort of behavior acceptable, you got to throw these folks out of office. That's ultimately what they're going to pay attention to.
Do you think there's a conversation to be had in regards to what appears to be it seems to me like the focus of the UCP is not to serve Albertans. It seems to be, and I say this because the tactics that they're using and the tactics that we're talking about today aren't tactics that I think most Albertans would feel comfortable getting behind. It seems like their priority is much more similar to the Republicans in the States, where it's winning and power at all costs. Do you think there's a conversation to be had around that?
I mean, I think so. I think you're right. That ultimately what Jason Kenney and the UCP are most concerned with is power and gaining and holding on to power and utilizing power for their own narrow interests. I think that there was a dissatisfaction at play in 2015 when you saw the first non-conservative government elected in the province in 44 years, that didn't suddenly bubble up over the course of the election campaign, where people had grown discontented and frustrated with the sense of entitlement and sort of it feels like you talk about like conservative entitlement and corruption and sort of like that sense that that the PC dynasty of yore wasn't serving Albertans. It almost feels quaint now compared to what we're dealing with. But there was that very visceral sense that like these guys are not in it for us, and Albertans had been sort of looking at their options for a while, and very nearly decided that they were going to elect a Wild Rose government in 2012, and then there were a few sort of key tactical and strategic mistakes that Danielle Smith and that government or that party engaged in that election campaign that resulted in them not being able to form government. But I mean, I think that a majority of Albertans don't like feeling like, and I mean, most people don't like this, don't like feeling like they're being used. Don't like feeling like they're being played. And the trick is figuring out how to have a conversation with them where they actually feel that way, because I think that there is still, I mean, there is such a strong and long-standing conservative identity that plays out in terms of the politics of this province, that a lot of folks are sort of naturally inclined to identify with Jason Kenney and identify with anything that has the word conservative in it. And it's a tricky needle to thread to figure out how to talk to those folks in a way that doesn't come off as condescending and doesn't come off as insincere, and sort of like doesn't like that actually penetrates and actually resonates with them. But I do think that there is that conversation to be had, and I think sort of there's recent polling where people have identified that they feel like they are worse off than they were a year ago. There's this Angus Reid poll that came out where people talked about feeling worse off than they were a year ago and feeling like things are only going to get worse. And folks feeling frustrated about how the government had handled the pandemic and how the government was handling healthcare and this war with doctors, and the raging dumpster fire that is Tyler Shandro and all of his public spectacles. And I think that there is an opportunity here to talk to folks about is this a government that is actually here to serve you? But folks need to be open to having that conversation. And I don't even mean those voters. I mean those folks who want to try and have that conversation and want to try and leverage that conversation into a different electoral outcome in 2023 need to be open to having that conversation with folks, and need to be open to talking to folks that they don't normally sort of think about going and talking to and engaging with. And they need to think carefully about like how are they going to go and talk to those people, and what are they going to talk to them about, and what is the message going to be, and are you going to go and say, well, if you voted UCP in 2019, then you're a bad person and you're stupid and you got fooled and you're a moron and and all this sort of stuff that that I sometimes hear a lot of people saying. Well, what's the likelihood that you're going to be able to have a meaningful conversation with somebody if that's the tactic that you're going to talk about? And I think the other thing that we need to, folks who are looking to unseat Jason Kenney in the UCP in 2023 need to get very, very good at talking to people about economics. Ultimately, that is jobs. I mean, look, they had this everywhere that they went in 2019. They knew exactly, Jason Kenney and the UCP knew exactly what the 2019 election was going to be about, and they made it the slogan of their campaign: jobs, the economy, and pipelines. Which is not to say that, when you're going to have these conversations, you need to be talking about jobs, the economy, and pipelines, but you do need to be talking about the economy. We need to get comfortable in that space and having a meaningful conversation with folks. And I think that that's where, that feeling of discontent and that feeling of pain that people are having right now around, Jason Kenney said he was going to come in and make everything better, and he has utterly and completely failed to do that on pretty much every count. And so we need to figure out how we go and have meaningful conversations with people, I think, very specifically about that issue, and connect with them and resonate with them, and get them. Get them really sort of sitting with that feeling of like, not only do I feel like I'm worse off, these guys aren't doing anything to alleviate that, and they're actually not interested in doing it either. And what am I going to do as a result?
I think one of the questions we did an episode a little while back with a lady named Jennifer Sanford, who has a podcast called Conservative Like Me, and one of the frustrations that she expressed is the fact that Jason Kenney and what he's created with the UCP is not what most traditional conservatives would identify with. I think that and I agree wholeheartedly with your sentiment on the fact that, saying, you got what you deserved doesn't accomplish anything when we're talking to people who believe they were voting for a traditional Alberta Conservative Party. One of the big things that I took away from that conversation with Jennifer, and one of the big things that I've taken away from other conversations with other people who have historically identified as conservative, is the fact that they very much feel homeless right now. There's a very strong sentiment that you're going to always have Alberta conservatives, not UCP conservatives, but Alberta conservatives, who will not vote NDP even if you hold a gun to their head. And one of the things that I'm finding very interesting is looking at the field for 2023. I don't see options for those folks. I mean, I know that there's some people who have said that they're looking at the Alberta Party, but it seems like the Alberta Party has a difficult time getting out of bed and putting both shoes on, let alone running a compelling campaign in 2023. Do you see any kind of hope for the traditional Alberta Conservative? Or do you think they're just going to end up, oh, well, it's the only one we got?
I think, engaging folks who have for generations identified as conservative. And I would agree that I don't think that Jason Kenney and the UCP are conservative. Not in the sort of the traditional sense that folks who for generations have identified as being an Alberta conservative, a small C conservative, would think of themselves. Jason Kenney and the UCP are far right populists who are again only interested in power and money and maintenance of power and fulfilling their own narrow agenda. And I've had conversations with conservatives, or people who identify as sort of small C conservatives, who sort of lament the idea that I was talking to Mark Taylor not long ago has been a Wild Rose organizer, and I think is currently involved in the Alberta Party, and does work with political R&D and sort of has been involved for a while. And he very much lamented in a conversation that we were having, where he's like, we used to be able to disagree about how we were going to get somewhere, but we both agreed that there was somewhere to get. And then the discussion, the debate was ultimately about like, how do we get there? And we could have really vociferous debates and really heated debates, but ultimately, there was a common understanding that we were trying, that we might even have different definitions of what it meant to better society or to build the province, but we agree that that's what we were doing. And that, the bottom seems to have fallen out of that sort of like common understanding that we're working towards. Like, I mean, this government, you could argue, doesn't even believe in the notion of a common good whatsoever, that there is any sort of like shared prosperity that we should all be working towards. And we've got very different ideas about how we get there. They're not even willing to sign on to that notion of shared prosperity or common good, or that that there is sort of something that we're all rowing towards. So do I have hope for the Mark Taylors of the world? I mean, I think those folks are like, they're going to have a a challenging decision that they're going to need to make in 2023. And I am, there's always debate about what is the appropriate way to approach this issue, and like are there quote unquote good conservatives, and what's the value of being a centrist, and shouldn't this just be like a dichotomy between either you're a progressive or you're a conservative, and you pick your side and that's it, and you can't meet in the middle whatsoever. And this is me personally, I just don't find that debate to be particularly useful, because I think it frames politics in a way that most people don't think about politics. Most people don't think about politics in terms of, like, when people talk about being conservative, they're talking about it from an identity and a values based proposition. They're not thinking about it, I don't believe, the majority of people, from a rigidly ideological standpoint. And most people, I don't think about politics in terms of strict ideologies. They think about it in terms of values and relationships and overall goals, and sort of like in terms of like how they live their lives, and what they're trying to achieve with their lives, and what their family and their friends are trying to achieve with their lives. At the end of the day, if I can have a conversation with somebody where we can have a meaningful discussion about what it means to create a better province, and we can have disagreements about what that looks like, and how we get there, and have difference of opinions, but we can agree that there is something. There is a common good that we can be working towards, and that we can have, a debate about how we get there. Then I'm always going to engage those folks, and so. Is there? I think there is always hope. There is, like, I won't stop talking. From my perspective, I'm never going to stop talking to the Mark Taylors of the world. I'm never going to stop talking to folks who are willing to engage in a sincere discussion about what we're trying to achieve with our politics. And there are folks who are not willing to engage in that sort of a conversation, and those are folks that I'm not interested in spending time talking to, ultimately. But I think that I'm kind of ever the optimist, so I always want to believe that there are enough folks out there that we can have a meaningful enough engagement to create some kind of positive change with politics. But it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of conversations, and we got to really, anybody who says, gee, I wish the Alberta election was tomorrow, I could not disagree with you more. There is a tremendous amount of work still to do, and I know it is challenging, and I know people are hurting, and that it is incredibly depressing to be organizing under this government. But we need absolutely every single year, month, week, day, minute that we can that we've got at our disposal to do as much of that work and lead up to the next election if we want to stand a chance of actually seeing a change of government.
With all of that being said, we're we're recording this on the day after the U.S. presidential election. And one of the things that we're seeing coming out of that is that Trump got a lot more support than a lot of people were anticipating, and it's going to be fascinating to air this in a week because hopefully by then the American people and the world will have some idea of what the results are of that election. But one of the things that I think that the results so far, just given that he's gotten way more support than a lot of people were anticipating, is the fact that there is a real hunger, it seems like, for leadership that doesn't play it safe. That certainly seems to be resonating with the Americans, and based on the fact that when I was out of the house yesterday, I saw a couple cars driving around with Trump stuffs in their windows in Calgary, Alberta. That the bombast seems to resonate effectively with people. Now, I don't think that, while there might be some shared tactics between Mr. Kenney and Mr. Trump, I don't think that Mr. Kenney carries himself with the same bravado that Mr. Trump does. Do you think that there's room for, or even will, inside of the progressive circle for leadership that does weigh into that a little bit?
I mean, I think so. Again, I think one of the, from my perspective, one of the mistakes that I think people make is they look at sort of at the way that those dynamics play out, and they think about it in pure ideological terms. And so that, you know, from a progressive standpoint, people go, well, we need to be unwavering progressives, and we need to be bold, and we need to, push the line on X, Y, and Z, and like, and we sort of need to like, create this sort of like unapologetically progressive political campaign, and that's what's going to resonate with people. And like, maybe like look, I identify as a political progressive, so I have no problems with that sort of an idea and championing progressive ideas. But I think that is to misunderstand ultimately what the dynamics at play are here, and that, like, one of the things that Donald Trump does exceptionally well is he does not speak to people in ideological terms, right? Like, what people love about Donald Trump is not that he is this like dyed-in-the-wool conservative. They love the way that he carries himself, and that that he speaks to them in a way that that strokes and inflames their egos in the way that they deeply want to have done, and they find him inspiring and strong and courageous and unwavering and all these sorts of things, and those are all sort of politics as personified by a person, and so so when we talk about being bold from the progressive side of the street, I think it's progressives traditionally have this tendency to focus on policy. And don't get me wrong, policy is important. But policy is ultimately what you enact after you win an election. And in the lead up to and during an election, what you really need to be talking to people about is ideas and values, and being bold in the sense of like being compelling, and being somebody that inspires people and grabs people's attention, and can light a fire under them, under the with the idea that they we could create some sort of change, something that is worth getting excited about, and something that is worth getting invested in, and something that that is worth you getting up off off your butt, and playing a role in trying to make it happen. And that doesn't necessarily need to attach itself to, or it's not even necessarily going to be particularly successful if you try and communicate that through a comprehensive series of policy statements. Policy statements don't tend to excite people. They don't tend to inspire people. I mean, like some people, political, you know, politicos like myself and folks that that like who live and breathe this stuff. Yeah, sure, we get it. We get excited by that sort of stuff. But the average voter, the average Albertan, if you release a 30-page policy document and say, this is what we're fighting for, like, is that what's gonna light a fire in their belly to try and go out and get involved and create change, the sort of change that we're talking about in the province? No, it's not ultimately. And so, yes, there's room for that sort of a compelling figure. And I think we need to focus on talking to people in terms that resonate with their lives, and resonate with their values, and resonate with who they are as people, and not see that sort of boldness that you referenced in strict ideological terms, like not in terms of being the most progressive that you can possibly be, but being an exciting, intelligent, inspiring, compassionate, progressive human being that people can feel connected to, and invested in.
The last question that I have for you, and we've kind of touched on it a little bit, and then I'll let you go, is there, when it comes to the strategies between conservatives and progressives in regards to getting their message and their people out there, one of the things that I've noticed, at least, and I've certainly heard other people mention the same thing, is that in the spaces where we can have conversations, and in the time of COVID, this is increasingly social media, conservatives tend to take, and I like to use the word, a very evangelical approach. So it seems like a lot of the hardcore UCP conservatives come from a background where they believe that their belief system not only is correct, but you need to believe it too, because if you don't, then everybody's screwed. So they don't give up a lot of space. And I think we see this going back to our earlier start of the conversation with the Matt Wolfs and the Brian Batesons, because they don't stop. Progressives, it seems like, have a tendency of looking at somebody with an opposing viewpoint and either going, you're wrong, or as you alluded to earlier, it's your own fault because you voted for this, and immediately putting a air of superiority on things. Or conversely, they just walk away and they just say, I'm not going to have this conversation. Is that something that progressives need to get past, in your opinion, in order to make a dent, or is it unimportant?
No, I think it's pretty key. I think that that's ultimately why. Look, there are very good and very talented people who are doing work for the NDP right now, and sort of like in doing organizing specifically under the umbrella of that political party. And I know many of them, and I hold many of them in very, very high regard. But the reason that I chose not to do that is because I think that there are important conversations and there's important engagement that needs to happen outside of that umbrella. And I am confident and know that there are folks that are continuing, like the work that the pure sort of like partisan political organizing work that political parties engage in is important and needs to happen. And is vital to build a vehicle via which you can you don't realize political change viable political parties. As you mentioned earlier about, some of the challenges that the Alberta Party seems to be having. Like if you had a more robust Alberta Party that seemed like it was more active and a more viable vehicle for some of those traditional conservative voters, you might be seeing some different political dynamics at play in the province. So I trust that there are folks, from my chosen team that are out there doing that very, very important work. But there's another sort of engagement. There's another plank of work that I think needs to be done, and I didn't see a lot of people doing. And so I decided when I took some time after the 2019 election, because it was a exhausting run up to and then exhausting election, and everybody needed a bit of time to figure out what the heck we were doing. When I decided it was time to re-engage, I made a conscious decision that I want to go have those conversations. I want to go, focus on that engagement. I want to be. I don't want to hang out in rooms with New Democrats. I want to go hang out with people I don't know, who are interested in having conversations and aren't totally sure. Like, the less sure somebody is who they're voting for, in some senses, the more interested I am in talking to you. Because I think that there are, the political dynamics of the province have changed. 2015 changed things. And I think ultimately, as much as, as we sort of whiplashed back to, a strong, quote unquote, conservative majority government, as somebody who has been active as a progressive political organizer and as a New Democrat in the province for a while, it is different now. There are more people to talk to. There are more meaningful conversations to have with Albertans around what politics does and can look like, and what we can achieve, and where we could go as a province than there ever has been. I think that having as many of those conversations and being very dogged and determined to have those conversations and engage those people and do it in, for me, as genuine and sincere a way as I possibly can, where I'm actually interested in having the conversation with them. And I'm not just ultimately look, at the end of the day, if someone says, well, okay, so we had this great conversation, we agree on a lot of things, who should I vote for? I'm going to tell them to vote for Rachel Notley and the NDP. And there's no, that's not a surprise to anybody who knows, who A, speaks to me for very long, or B, has any sense for, what my past looks like. But what I want in engaging those folks is for the lead up. They know if they ask that question, they know that's the answer they're going to get. But they feel like the conversation that we have, A, they need to ask the question. And B, the conversation that we have before we get to that question is a real conversation where I'm actually engaging them. I'm actually interested in who they are as a person, and what their goals are, and what their life's about, and what their experiences have been, and what's important to them, and having a really robust political conversation with them that A, I don't think a lot of people have had in this province, and B, they're very much not used to having with a New Democrat. And I get a lot of people who are sort of like, you don't act like a lot of New Democrats out there. And I take that as a compliment. But also, I think there are a lot more New Democrats in the province who are interested in those sort of sincere and genuine conversations, and are a lot more warm and grounded and real people than a lot of people think. And I know a lot of those New Democrats who are in this for all the right reasons. And look, you're talking about whether you're talking about the NDP as a party narrowly, or whether you're talking about the progressive movement in Alberta more broadly. I mean, in a lot of ways, it is trying to do a quantum leap in terms of its organizing, you're coming up against, a conservative movement that has been around for generations, and we're still very early on in terms of figuring out who we are and what we can do and what we can accomplish and how we can come together and what the direction of the province could be after we sort of really smash this myth that every single government that ever gets elected in Alberta must be and will be conservative. Suddenly there's a whole new realm of possibilities open to folks, and it takes time to figure all of that out. And it takes a lot of engagement and a lot of commitment and a lot of conversations. And we just need as many people plugging away on that as possible.
Just to get ahead of things before I let you go, the Bully Pulpit series that you wrote, because I know that there's probably going to be some speculation that happens. Were you paid by the NDP to write that, and if so, how much?
I was not. The first instance in which I received any compensation on that work was I did three installments. So first wrote about Melanie Thomas, then wrote about Wing Carly, and then wrote about Jillian Ratty. All of that appeared on my own site, and then the Jillian Ratty piece, because of the timing of it, because she announced the day before the story came out that her family was making the decision to leave Alberta, so it sort of exploded. And she's just an amazing person. She's an amazing woman, and has drawn so much attention and so much admiration from so many different people that the timing of that meant that people paid a lot of attention to that story, and I had the folks at Progress Alberta read it and then reach out to me and say, hey, this is really great. We would like to have more of this kind of writing in the Progress report. And so I then pitched to them the idea of basically a wrap-up piece to that series, which we ran under a different title because it kind of became its own thing as well. But that was the first time that I got any compensation for writing the Bully Pulpit series, was when Progress Alberta decided they wanted to do a wrap-up piece and they were going to compensate me for writing it for them.
Okay, so you weren't paid to start the project from there or anything like that?
No, I really wasn't. I'd like to get paid for more of the writing that I do, but no, I do not have a secret cabal of NDP benefactors.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for being as generous with your time as you have been today. I really enjoyed the conversation. I know our listeners are going to enjoy it as well. And I hope we cross paths again sometime soon.
I am sure we will. Thank you for the opportunity to come and give you overly long answers on Alberta politics.
One more thing before I let you go. You have a website where you do your writing. For our listeners, what is that website?
It's Scott, so SCOTT, Harold, HAROLD, Payne, PAYNE.com. So ScottHaroldPayne.com.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you again for your time.
It has been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And that's our show. As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, please consider signing up to be one of our monthly sponsors at our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. For just the price of a cup of coffee every month, you can help us to continue to try to produce the kind of stories that we're doing in the way that we're doing them. Additionally, if you're listening to the audio version of our podcast, please consider leaving us a rating and a review on whatever platform it is that you're listening to, because it's those ratings and reviews that help us get our podcast in front of more people. And finally, if you're not already following us on social media, please consider following us on your favorite social media platform, all at The Breakdown AB. Thank you for your time.